What's up? What's up? What's up? How y'all doing out there? As you can see today, I'm not rocking the ponytail look. I got it spread out a little bit. Some of it's still in the back, but we're trying new things. We're trying better things, and hopefully y'all appreciate that about my hair. It's Soul Expression, your humble host, as Baron Coleman would say, and I welcome you all into this space. Welcome back to the Inner Storyteller. Welcome back to this channel, the Soul Expression YouTube channel, as well as the Ufuluchild YouTube channel. And we are going to get into some things in this video. So first of all, I'm very excited that I am seeing connections in my real life, like outside and meeting people, synchronicities, walking into restaurants and seeing old friends that have great connections, going to Confluence for 4 days and ending up performing live on stage in front of, about 150 people or so, with presence and getting to do my thing, share some lyrics with the good people at Confluence. Conscious Influence. It's a yearly conference slash camping trip that you all should check out. And if you got an RV, even better. It's on Sovereignty Ranch out here in Bandera, Texas. And what I'm seeing is that life is preparing me to launch this work full force, to just go full force, all engines ablaze, full speed ahead. And that's what we're going to do. So that's what we're going to get into today. As you can see, today's video is not titled the same way that the second live was titled at first. I did go back and actually change that title on the YouTube channel. So if you go and look at other videos in this playlist, you will see that change. And I'm not going to name any other videos the exact same way as I did the first live until I'm ready to move on to that part of the philosophical map, which is a companion text that goes with the main book. So I'll show you that really fast. Here we go. Share. Yeah. So this, the Inner Storyteller, a philosophical map. You have the power to rewrite the story that defined you, is the companion text to the Inner Storyteller, the main book. And one of the coolest things about the Inner Storyteller is that it permeates through all information whatsoever. Because any information that we come across as human beings, we interpret, we gain the meaning from that information in story form. We experience life internally in story form. And that means that the Inner Storyteller as a concept can and does permeate through all information, permeate through all areas of study, areas of discovery, of exploration. And that's a really beautiful thing, because you don't want to, if you're going to make a splash in the human family's mind, right? If you're going to try and change enough minds, you don't want to start with something that is too small to permeate through a lot of areas of life. You want to build off of a foundation that is fundamental to life itself. And the Inner Storyteller, does just that. And I'm so very grateful to the creator for putting the language for it, in my head and in my experience. Now, without further ado, let's get into today's topic, which is actually, we're going to be talking about the true political spectrum. Okay, the true political spectrum, as opposed to the false political spectrum. Okay, so first, we're going to have to get into what is the false political spectrum. Well, as you can see on your screen here, what most people think the political spectrum is going from the far left or the extremely left to the far right. Okay. And within this dichotomy, this false dichotomy, you have policy and party affiliation as the determining factor for where you land on the political spectrum. So we have the far left, you have communism, right, which is the global version of a centralized power that makes all of the rules, holds all of the data, holds all of the power, and holds all of the decision making power. Next to communism, you have socialism, which basically is communism without the social power. So there's a system in the middle that somehow people don't run, which is impossible, of course, and a little bit silly. And that system makes all the rules and holds all the data and um, has holds all the power and whatnot. So we have communism, then socialism. As you move closer to the center, you have some liberal and democratic views and ideas that the government should step in and help people when there's disparities and when there's inequalities and inequities, um, and that should be the government's job to help us out and to give us free handouts, and we should be able to vote on what the people want by way of the majority wins, the majority rules, pardon me. And then in the center, you don't really have any conversation. And then to the right of the center, you have some conservative slash Republican uh, um, ideals, where conservative small government, constitutional kind of republic, and there's still people that basically, a Congress, and people that make all of the decisions. And conservatives love the idea of a police force and the police coming and knocking down the doors of the bad guys, whoever the government determines is the bad guys. And of course, the government would never determine that somebody who's actually a good guy or a normal guy is a bad guy. That never happens, right? So we have that republicanism, conservatism. We live in a republic and not a democracy is a big conservative talking point that makes absolutely no sense when you look at the nation's actual history and the laws that are on the books, and the fact that statutes and ordinances, city ordinances and things are just rules, and they are essentially contract derived, whereas how it's written, what was supposed to happen is something was supposed to be protecting the rights that are derived from God and the universe itself. But instead, we have these distinctions between privileges and rights, and the privileges are governed by statutes, and conservatives and Republicans and whatnot can send their dogs after you to go get you if you violated a city ordinance. If you parked for too long in front of the city building because you were having a conversation, then they can take your car or whatever. And if you try and stop them, then they can put you in a cage and or take your life. Then we have nationalism, right? Nationalism is basically soft fascism. Nationalism as a broad concept is completely fine. It just means regionalism. It just means that you really love the people that you grew up around. But nationalism as it exists on this political spectrum is, the policies that we enact are for our nation and for the people of our nation. Outsiders of our nation have, some stigmas because our nation is the best and our nation's people are the best people in the world. And that's kind of the undertone of the policies that are written in a nationalist society. And then you get fascism, which is communism for one nation at a time. So one power, one small group of people called the government hold all of the power, hold all of the data, hold all of the decision making authority. And of course, they have their dogs, they have their police and military and things. And it's just communism, but on a national uh, scope. scale, if you will, whereas communism is on a global scale. And this is what people think is the political spectrum. But I'm here to tell you, good people, the real political spectrum is not going from far left to far right. If you look at that graph, and I'll put it back on the stage again, you see that both communism and fascism are forms of tyranny, right? Fascism is national communism. Communism is global fascism, right? Both of them appoint a centralized entity called government, run by a few flesh and blood human beings, um, who are of the mindset that they have a divine right to rule people and that the people have a divine obligation to obey their command. Both sides of this, the far right is authoritarian, the far left is authoritarian. Under fascism, people are starved. Under communism, people are starved. Under fascism, people are brutalized by the police and military. Under communism, people are brutalized by the same. Right? Under fascism, we have war crimes when it comes to foreign policy. Under communism, we have war crimes in the guise of public policy. And in the middle, the liberal, the Democrat, the conservative, the Republican, the economic, you have the capitalism on the right, you have the socialism on the left. These things are different forms of power broker concepts and ideas. Where does the power go? Who has the authority to make the decisions for the everyday average person? What central power, meaning what centralized group of people hold all of the power? Okay? And that's on both sides of the spectrum. Therefore, that's not a real spectrum. Okay? A real spectrum doesn't go from 100 to 100. A real spectrum goes from 0 to 100, or invisible to visible, right? We think about the color spectrum and how Roy G. Biv, the rainbow, is actually within a much larger color spectrum that goes from 0 to infinite colors, if you will. And what we can see, okay, is the Roy G. Biv to the black and white color spectrum that we say is the color spectrum. But just because, we have a bunch of colors and they seem to kind of, you can make a circle out of that color spectrum that we can see, the visible light color spectrum. And it seems it would make a nice, neat circle. Spectrums don't actually work like that, especially when it comes to the ideas like political affiliation and political policy and policy. The real political spectrum would actually look something like this. And this comes from a presentation by Mark Passio, the greatest teacher of natural law ever to live. Mark Passio, in a presentation, I believe, called Two Masks, Same Face, or something like that. Let me just see. Let me just pull it up really quick and make sure I'm not making a fool of myself saying the wrong name. Here we go. Two masks, same face. Two masks, same face. And where he's talking about the dark occult origins of Nazism or fascism or nationalism and communism. Okay. Uh, Communism on the far left, fascism on the far right, Nazism on the far right, and their occult origins. In this presentation, he shows this graph, brilliantly created graph, where we see that on the bottom, okay, on the horizontal line, on the what's called the x-axis, we have the amount of external government based on coercion and control. So external government, meaning government that exists outside of the individual, government that exists by way of buildings and people who are not you, that have told themselves and others that they have a divine right to rule over you from these buildings and with these name tags and with these titles. Amount of external government based on coercion and control. And in that, we see that total control, communism on the left, gets as you move toward the right and you go all the way to the right, we see fascism is on the other side. Both of them are at total control. So when you get to communism, global fascism, you're at total control. When you get to fascism, national communism, you get to total control. As you move up the y-axis, you're moving up from unconscious structure to enlightened structure, to fully conscious and aware structure, aware of the moral and causal factors that are playing into the whole game. Okay. And awareness of what one should do versus what they shouldn't do. And it says amount of consciousness or internal government, meaning you govern yourself, self-governance, the amount of consciousness or internal government and respect of self-ownership present in society. So as you move up the y-axis, you get more and more respect of self-ownership present in the society, or respect of self-governance. And it's the same thing. So you have socialism and capitalism, a little bit higher than communism and fascism. You're still unconscious in these systems. You have the republic based on classic liberalism, or the republic based on classic conservatism, a little bit higher, a little bit conscious. You can imagine governments or government structures that are closer to consciousness within those frameworks. You have libertarianism, left leaning, and libertarianism, right leaning. And then at the very top, you have anarchy, which does not mean chaos, of course. Anarchy means no imposed rulers or no false masters. Nobody at the top of the food chain saying that they have a divine right to rule. Okay. The real political spectrum is a function of consciousness, where you move from, wait a minute. There we go. Where you move from an unconscious state where you're in total control of government to a fully enlightened state where there is no existence of government. And that is a real political spectrum, ladies and gentlemen, going from 0 to 100, not going from not choosing between two forms of control and saying you fall somewhere in between on the political spectrum. That's not a spectrum. That's just flavor of control, right? So that is basically what I wanted to come on here live and talk with you guys about. I hope that made sense, and I hope you do get something from it. Now, what does all this mean? Well, again, most people believe that the political spectrum runs from left to right, from Democrat to Republican, or from liberal to conservative, from socialist to fascist, etc. This framing is taught in schools. It's reinforced by media and movies, entertainment. It's reinforced in the symbols that we see. It's repeated until it feels like the only way to see the political spectrum is to see it through that lens, right? It's designed to cage the mind within a certain framework, and it gives you the illusion of choice by way of voting or by way of participating in public commentary on what your favorite structure of government is, as long as you keep the conversation as far away from anarchy as possible and you stay within this false dichotomy, this false spectrum, Hegelian dialectic, if you will. It gives you the illusion of choice, keeping the real question off the table entirely. The real question being, should we have rulers or not? Both ends of the left and right spectrum require external coercive authority over human beings, and they only disagree on the style and the justification for how they do authoritarian rule. Communism and fascism feel like opposites because of what we're taught. They sit at opposite ends of the horizontal x-axis of the graph, but they also sit near zero consciousness, because consciousness is holistic. So you don't take just the intellect into account when you're measuring the level of consciousness in a given society. You have to also take the care, what do the people care about, into said measurement. And if the people don't care about anything and are just okay with the government running amok with their rights and trampling on all of their rights, then you're not dealing with a conscious society. And the argument between the two, the far left and the far right, is not a debate about freedom. It's a debate about which flavor of slavery is more palatable. Now, again, the real spectrum has always been the vertical spectrum, from control by government up into anarchy, self-governance. The only meaningful political question in any era, in any country, at any time, in any language, is how much external coercive control over human beings is legitimate and why. And the answer is always none, because free will is God-given. The inverse of external control is not a different government. The inverse of external control is no government. I'm jumping ahead a little bit because I'm going to discuss this further in a future video. But there's this book entitled The End of All Evil. It's written by Jeremy Locke, and it's probably my favorite book in the world. And in it, Jeremy Locke gives us a definition for the word anarchy, but he doesn't actually give us a definition. You know what he says about anarchy? He says, the definition of anarchy is that there is no such thing as anarchy. There is only tyranny and freedom. And anarchy is just not, it's not even a thing. It's, you create a word and you create a concept that helps hide what you're actually doing, which is called euphemism, right? Anarchy is like an inverse euphemism. Usually, and a euphemism is used for something that's grotesque. Well, because Satanists that run the world find freedom of the people, the freedom that we're given by God, us regular people who are not elite psychopaths like they find that freedom grotesque and bad and ugly and look away. Stop them. Somebody stop them from being so free and having so much fun. So, because they find that nasty, they euphemized freedom and gave us the word anarchy. And they told us that anarchy means chaos. And anarchy means, and an anarchist is a completely immature, not forward-thinking, lazy, intellectually lazy individual who just, doesn't believe in rules. Right? I don't know if you guys can hear that siren, but he finally just went past my window. So hopefully the sound, if it's intruding, doesn't intrude for too much longer. But that's the idea that we're given, is that, there's tyranny, then there's government, and then there's anarchy. And anarchy is bad and whatnot. Couldn't be further from the truth. Anarchy is just suppressed, and it's actually the natural state of affairs. I talked about this extensively with Corey Endralat. You guys should definitely check that live out. It was one of my favorite conversations that I've ever had in a virtual space. And we get deeply into the fact that anarchy does not actually exist. There's no such thing, because anarchy is the natural state of being. And the natural state of being is much more than just anarchy. It's much more than just an opinion or a worldview on public policy. When you wake up in the morning and you think your thoughts and you go use the bathroom and you put on your clothes, you don't ask for permission to do so. You don't ask for permission to breathe. You don't wait on the government to send you an email that says, you can go to work today, or you can put on your shoes. You can put on your pants one leg at a time. You don't need permission to live your life. And because you don't need permission to live the everyday aspects of your life, you also don't need permission to make the big decisions that you make in your life. We just feel like we need permission to make the big decisions or to make a splash socially because of how much conditioning we get day in and day out from birth to death that government is legitimate and anarchy is illegitimate. I digress. This is not a theory, okay? This is observable reality across every civilization in history. As consciousness falls, as morality or moral behavior decays, meaning fear, dependency, moral confusion, okay, and obedience to corrupt systems, as these things grow, external control fills the vacuum where truth once was, where responsibility and accountability once was. What fills that vacuum is the external control of a given region. Okay, the people that are given the authority to rule over the others. As consciousness rises in a given region or population, as moral behavior is more and more solidified and becomes more and more normalized in a given society, meaning self-ownership, right? Moral clarity, personal responsibility, things like this. The need for imposed external control diminishes. And if we don't need it, we don't use it. We don't have it. When's the last time you called the cops on purpose when nothing was going on that you thought the cops could serve? You don't just stay in emergency mode all day long, right? Now, something you should know is that this spectrum, this political spectrum, goes back many, many years, right? Ancient Rome, the feudal lords of Europe, colonial empires from China, from the East, from the West, whatever, even modern nation states. The question is never really left versus right. It's always how conscious is the population, right? And the measurement of how conscious a population is always touches on how morally do they behave. And how morally we behave always dictates how much freedom we experience day to day. Okay? The priest class, the banker class, the Epstein class, the ruling class, in every era, understood this relationship. And at the expense of the greater population, which does not typically understand this relationship, they use euphemisms and word magic to condition us into the mindset that they want to give us, which they don't hold themselves, which is that the more freedom a society has, the more dangerous its people becomes, right? So, and as I bring this into how the inner storyteller connects and fits, how my philosophy fits with all of this, I'll leave you with one last thought. Controlled opposition on both the political left and the political right, on that horizontal unconscious line, both sides exist to maintain the horizontal line itself. Okay? There is controlled opposition on the right that's actually working to legitimize the left. There's controlled opposition on the left that's actually working to legitimize the right. And there's controlled opposition all across the board that legitimizes the notion that This is the political spectrum, the far left all the way to the center, all the way to the far right. Now, how does the inner storyteller fit into all of this, all of these relationships? Well, where a person sits on the real spectrum, okay, let me pull the real spectrum back up. Where a person sits on the real spectrum is not determined by how they vote. It's not determined by their favorite news anchor. It's not determined by the podcasters that they listen to. It's not determined by the articles they write. Where a person sits on the real political spectrum is only determined by the state of their inner consciousness. And their inner consciousness is programmed by a bigger force, which is called the inner storyteller. Okay? Your inner storyteller is a deeper, more intimate existence within the human psyche than even your conscience, which gives you, your sort of gut feeling, and you can follow that inner voice. Even bigger than that, even before that develops, the inner storyteller is already gaining its programming, telling its stories, and shaping your soul, kind of, so to speak, shaping your battleground for this round of life, right? What stories has a person been given about authority, about freedom, about safety? What stories have they been given about who is responsible for their life, right? Whether it's them themselves or some external force. A colonized inner storyteller, conditioned in the wrong way inner storyteller, seeks external governance. And this is because we are taught to not even tolerate the idea of self-governance. And therefore, even in our bodies, as far as when we imagine and try to do thought experiments that involve anarchy, or that involve a world where the 99% are doing real world actions to move toward a world that no longer agrees that government is legitimate, and no longer has governments existing, and no longer has slavery in any form existing, we can't even tolerate the weight of self-governance, because the inner storyteller has been so conditioned to associate anarchy, or a lack of masters and a lack of enslavers, with a lack of safety. You think about how many people push the idea that human nature is inherently greedy and lazy. How many rulers push the idea that human nature is inherently lazy and greedy and ruthless, right? But that's just called projection. You project onto others your own guilt and your own sin. Moving on. A reclaimed inner storyteller. Okay, the inner storyteller of someone who has reclaimed authorship over their own life moves up the vertical axis of this graph naturally, not because of the ideology they hold alone, but because of the genuine moral development that comes with the awareness that the inner storyteller exists, and the awareness of how exactly it is manipulated and or programmed, and has done the work to reprogram their personal inner storyteller to be in more alignment with truth. Nobody can be perfectly aligned with truth. Nobody can perfectly articulate truth to anybody else. Shout out to everybody that's tried. Okay, it's not possible. The greatest minds on earth will tell you that it's impossible to try to encapsulate truth in words alone. But the more that truth is on people's tongues at the dinner table, the closer we get to freedom in a given society. And the more that happens collectively, the more we collectively develop a strength to resist tyranny. from the self-proclaimed masters. The goal is never to actually like win an election and change the person that's in the seat because they have, they sit differently on the bottom axis of the so-called political spectrum. No, the goal is actually always to raise the consciousness of the people that inhabit the society, a given society. Right? That's the goal. And yeah, there's just really nothing else to say about it. There's really nothing else to say about it. So today, is a really, really, really good day. And I'm very happy about doing these lives again and being a podcaster again. Please, for me, like the video, subscribe to the channel. You know, check out the Linktree, linktr.ee/ufuluchild, as you can see on the screen. Get a copy of The Inner Storyteller. This is the cover. Come on. There we go. I think it's probably reading backwards for you guys. I apologize, but that's the cover nonetheless on that little paper right there. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. I'm trying to think if there's any announcements that I should get off. I should probably prepare like final announcements before I go live. I'll probably try to do that tomorrow. But I think that's all I got for y'all, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.